Hello everyone, this is Mini Ninja speaking. Welcome to today's episode of the Bootleg Breakdown program, where we're going to look at the Legend Creation take on the SH Figuarts Zamasu Portara version, aka the Merged Zamasu figure. For anyone who was joining us from the previous episode, you probably saw that we reviewed a bootleg version of the Rage Broly figure, which, despite being a little undersized and not having all the articulation points, or fully functioning ones in terms of the hips, was, for the most part otherwise, a pretty good figure and a decent representation for half the price. That being said, Legend Creations doesn't exactly have the best overall record when it comes to doing regular size figures, of which Zamasu tends to be. So let's see if it happens to break the pattern. Let's start trying to get him out of the package here, and his head comes right off. That's okay. This is a fairly regular problem. We're used to having things coming off right in the packaging there. So let's get the rest of the packaging out of the way. Let's get rid of the halo, or what kind of effect you have in the background there. A second. Well, at least it has all the parts you expect out there. And let's see if we can do something in order to get that head in there for our first impressions. This happens to explain a little bit. The neck peg in question is not a real neck peg per se, as much as it is a double-ended ball peg. Little purple thing you see there. Which is going to take a little more work in order to get on there, so we're actually going to skip that for the moment and get the main articulation check, sans head, because I'm going to have to heat up the whole figure to fit it. As soon as we try to plug this shoulder back in, we're going to take a look at how the articulation is generally holding up, and admittedly it's not holding up very well. That neck is not moving whatsoever on there. It's actually completely stuck, moving onto the shoulder. Admittedly, once we get this sleeve back off, because it just won't stay on there, the shoulder itself has reasonable enough movement in terms of the regular joint, but no butterfly joint at all. While the figure isn't exactly loose per se, it's not exactly tight either. Moving on to the elbows are functional. Not the prettiest thing by any means, but at least they're not the weird bulbous shaped ones that have been appearing on a lot of their works as of late. So that's at least some sort of a plus. That's a slight win there. Upper body though, because it's undersized as always, has very limited tight movement in this case. Namely, you can't really move it back and forth, and even the side to side is limited. Hips, of course, you can kick out about yay far, but because of the fake hips, they won't go out the full way. Knee joints are functional as always. Toe joints are actually surprisingly working in this case. And ankle joints they look like they should be functional enough, but it's because of the way the boots are cut, there's going to be limited movement no matter what, unless you pull out the boots slightly. Which, of course, also makes it harder to stand the figure as a whole. I had the same issue with both the real Goku Black as well as the chosen ones for that matter, so that's not exactly a huge surprise. That's more of a fault with the consistent boot sculpt that they tend to use on these figures. That being said, I think I have a bit of a lemon on my hands here, because I had what I felt was an impossible time getting this figure to stand up properly for the next shot, which is of him standing under his own power, as well as with the head attached. So once you get it all together here, it almost looks presentable there, although you can kind of tell the main body is a little shinier than it should be. Most SH figures tend to have more of a matte finish, but there's a bit of a gloss all over on the non-rubberized parts of Zamasu here. Also, it's a bit odd, the neck does feel a little bit short, because on the real one you should be able to see the neck a little better, and speaking of the neck, there it is, with the head popping up again, because, as I was suggesting earlier, the double-ended ball peg is really not doing the job of keeping things together. It's a little too short in order to hold both in the neck as well as hold the head in place, I find, at least on my copy. And to help emphasize the point a little better, well, this was supposed to be a standing shot of them standing side by side, but as you can kind of guess, I couldn't get a proper shot of that because the bootleg just kept falling down, for Christ's sake. So we're actually going to have to pull out a stand here in order to make this next shot work, so let's do just that. Here's what a general side by side looks. As you can see, the bootleg is a good deal smaller. I'm going to say it's about 5 1/4 inches tall to be generous at times. And that makes it a good 1/4 inch smaller, at the very least, compared to the real one. Also, upper body wise, you can tell the recast is notably thinner and smaller than the real one, which explains why that upper body can't move at all. This kind of emphasizes the difference in finish on the main body there. And do I need to really explain the hair on this one? Yeah, the hair and neck on the bootleg are just truncated at best. They're much smaller than they should be, and of course the bootleg is much less detailed. Heck, even if you go to the halo in this case, the halo and its connector don't actually fit well, at least on my bootleg at all. Kept falling off, much like the head. And with that, let's move on to the accessories portion of our video here. Namely, we're going to start off with the faces, and for the bootleg ones, They tend to have some things in common, namely that they're slightly smaller than the real deals, as well as a lot glossier, quite frankly, on that one. On the main face, on the real one there, you can kind of see on the one on the right, it's a much more matte finish for the most part on the actual green skin. And while the glossy end on the melted faces is fairly appropriate, I would say, they tend to match a little better on that end. Even on the half face on the real one, it should have still a matte finish on the other side of the face, but overall in the bootleg, it's glossy all around. What I can say though is the decals do tend to be pretty alright though. All in all, not always perfectly placed, but they're reasonably enough that they wouldn't stand out too terribly. The paint job on a few details though, like here and there, like the teeth and such, are a little haphazard, but it's nothing that can't be fixed. Mind you, you will need to do a little more fixing when it comes to the sideburns, because on top of them being kind of crudely painted, they also don't match the hair at all, which is more of a gray thing, as opposed to the real kind of more shinier white that the real one has. Here's something though as a general proof of concept. Can you fit the real faces on the bootleg head? Yes you can, although there is a bit of a gap overall at the top there because, as mentioned earlier, the real faces are slightly bigger than what the bootleg head has, which is also slightly misshapen in my case because the bottom was not properly attached. In that case, in our example with a more normal face, there is a gap there. Now, for anyone who might be wondering, yes, you can use the bootleg faces on the real head. So on the off chance you happen to have lost some of the real faces, or want to use them for some custom work, that is something you can do as well, although I would probably recommend, especially for the more normal faces, you definitely want to put it through a little bit of a matte finish, like spray it down with something, in order to knock some of the gloss off, because that does tend to stand out, as it doesn't match the finish for the rest of the figure on the real one whatsoever. But for more proof of concept, here's a more normal looking bootleg face. It's not 100% fit, but it's definitely well enough in order to get on there and get the job done, now isn't it? And one more proof of concept in action. Let's just see if the ball pegs on the fake figure match up with the real one, and the answer is, to the surprise of no one unfortunately, no, they don't match at all whatsoever. In fact, they're this weird, much smaller joint that I've only seen on Legend Creation figures up to this point, which are much, much smaller and narrower than what the real deal have. So if you were thinking of getting the bootleg in order to make replacement parts from the box, you're not going to be able to get them to fit. They're just much smaller in nature, so you will need to be expanding the opening and drilling into the hand in order to get it to fit if you really want to do that. Not that I would honestly recommend it, because once we do kind of a proper side-by-side of what the different hands look like, getting the same one, you'll see that the actual hands themselves are notably smaller, a little deformed in fact, and much less detailed. There's a much softer casting. The one thing I did forget to address in this particular video was that the mutated arm here honestly could be used as a replacement part on the real figure. It actually has really nice tight joints on it, has a ball peg on the end that would fit well enough on the real figure. It's actually compatible, and aside from being slightly undersized, is a generally good fit. Unfortunately, this is about as much as I can say in terms of positive things about the particular figure in front of me, and that's because it suffers from generally all the other issues that all the other regular size Legend Creation bootlegs tend to suffer from. The figure itself is slightly undersized because of the way it's been recasted. The way it's recasted is done so in order to simplify and remove various bits of articulation, namely the hips and the butterfly joints, which are completely absent. And what is in there that's meant to replace the regular articulation joints are either haphazard bits or just shoddy replacements like the hip joints here, or the knee and elbow joints, which are technically functional, but because of the way they've been built, they're lesser quality than the real ones, and thus couldn't be replaced and used on another figure if you did want to even pick this up for certain assorted other parts. So that doesn't leave yourself a lot to work with, quite frankly. The only real surprise I've had is that the toe joints actually work on this damn thing, which is something I don't get to say very often on the Legend Creation bootleg. All in all, would I be able to recommend this bootleg? Honestly, no. Maybe I just got a particularly bad version of it, and you could find something that is less prone to falling apart, or just would be able to hold up better on its own. But at least based on the one I hear, this is any indication of the quality, which based on the other bootlegs I've seen, seems to be the case. No, save your money, or if you really need this, save up and never to get a real version of this figure, because no, this is a hot mess here. Thanks for watching, everyone. Catch you later.